Hi, everybody. I'm Eileen O'Mahony. I'm the General Manager here at WM Promus. I head up our consultancy team, and I'm here to talk about DevOps today, what it is, which a lot of you might be familiar with, what we've done as a consultancy firm with DevOps, why I'm such a fan, and why it's not going away anywhere soon. I've got a slide deck I'm going to share and talk you through stuff. I'll turn off my cam while I'm sharing my screen. And you'll see me again then towards the end, and we'll have a question and answer session then as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk first of all about who we are, who WM Promus are. We're based in London. We're going for over 15 years. The team are actually, although we've got an office here in London, the team are actually running all the way across Europe. We're multilingual. We work in lots of sectors, higher education, banking and finance, retail, defense, and so on. So I think we've got a really good feel for how DevOps might be different in different communities. Let's talk a little bit about our journey. I think our journey is very similar to lots of other people's. And I think that's what makes us sensitive or aware of how it might be difficult for other people to implement DevOps. So we began in the IT asset management space. Everybody wants to know what IT assets they own, what they're worth, the state of their software, license compliance, and so on. And after a small amount of time, we moved into the IT service management space and monitoring IT devices and so on. And a core part of our work became configuration management. So if you're an IT asset manager, you want to know what you own, but if you're a configuration manager, you want to know what it's connected to, what those business services, those configuration items are supporting and so on, and what impact on your business a change to a device might cause. So increasingly, we and our clients became interested in automating configuration management. That's, essentially using DevOps tools and technologies to make massive improvements to how we operated. And as we were going through that life ourselves, or that journey, we were making improvements for our clients through automation at the same time and having a lot of conversations with them about what they could do. Now, that sort of led us into a lot of cloud projects. Tend to be a really great place for people to start with DevOps approaches. And then it led us towards chatting to people outside of the IT department within our clients, the non-IT people, HR, finance, legal, and so on. And we ended up looking at how automation, like robotic process automation or intelligent assistants, might be suitable technology to deliver what they need. So I'm not going to talk about that today, but just give you a sense of where we are and who we are. Right. So regardless of which sector our clients in many ways, they want the same things. So they want satisfied customers. Now, that doesn't matter if those customers are internal. So if you're an IT department and you're serving the rest of the business, or whether it's end customers who are buying your actual business services from your organization. They want to get better. Everybody expects the people who deliver IT services to improve over time. They want it to cost less. They want to reduce the resource drain, whether that's money, people, and so on. Increasingly, what we're seeing is that you need to be more secure. That's on everyone's agenda now. That's the backdrop to an awful lot of the conversations we're currently having. Everything you're meant to do it quicker. You need to be able to scale. You need to be able to do that quicker while still maintaining quality. So this is what all our clients want. But what's stopping them from getting there? So this is where we're going with the challenges that they face, and why we firmly believe that DevOps tools, technologies, and the approach can actually combat a lot of that. So we will sometimes get a time where a client presents us with a request to build a solution rather than telling us, what the actual issue is. So my preference is always to discuss with clients, what's the problem? What are the challenges they're facing? What's stopping them from meeting their strategic goals? And then once we're looking at that, say, right, well, actually, from when we're coming from a DevOps approach, we really do believe that you can tackle a lot of these challenges. So, what a lot of people face is like a long delivery cycle. So that means you're missing market opportunities, you're reducing customer satisfaction. The longer it takes to deliver features, often the more likely it is you're going to incur some technical debt. A really common one is consistent environments. It's so common to see clients where they've got dev, test, prod, and so on, but they're actually not functioning exactly the same. They haven't been built in exactly the same way. So you're getting bugs, unexpected behavior and stuff as you're trying to get ready for releases. If an issue comes up in one environment but not another, it can be really challenging then to reproduce the problem, to do some investigation and fixing. So we talked about resources. So there's many aspects of this. One is that it's costly. You know, highly skilled IT people are costly. The other thing is if you don't have them doing new stuff, they move, they'll go somewhere else, they'll go to your competitors. So you really do need to introduce modern ways of working to keep that highly skilled workforce. It's costing you, so you don't really want them doing repetitive tasks that could be done by code. We've mentioned security. The surface area that organizations tend to be using across on-premise and cloud is expanding, so you're becoming increasingly exposed. Configuration drift, so minor changes, even if you're having a good change management process in place, is very common. You might have people making manual changes to systems without properly documenting them, or because manual changes are made, you can have some slight deviations and so on. Reporting. We all know this. No matter what's in your IT estate, someone is expecting to report on it. It might be that you have to report on compliance, or it might be just knowing what business services are supporting what IT apps and infrastructure and so on. But this is becoming an increasingly complex chore for lots of people. Scalability, another massive challenge. So we're talking about computing resources, storage capacity, network bandwidth, all of the stuff that you need to look at to ensure smooth operation as your client base expands, as your employee base expands, as your data volume increases, and so on. Code control, right? You need to do something about tracking your code. You need to do something about people working on code together. How are we going to look at that? That's a massive challenge. And of course, the last one, the dollars, the pound signs. IT departments spend their whole time walking a tightrope between delivering to the business, meeting what the business needs, trying to have, embrace new technologies and innovation, but also needing to stay within a very limited budget a lot of the time. So DevOps, this is your solution to all those challenges. So first off, there's lots of opinions about what DevOps is and how you define it. Does it really only have meaning where an organization is doing application development and you've got IT teams supporting those applications? So yes, there's an element of that. But what we would definitely say here is because it's a way of working, it's not just a technology, it's about practices, it's about tools, it's about a shift in culture. This is not just about people who are developing software applications. It really isn't. It's really about a set of philosophies, practices, and so on. So I've just listed a couple of them up here. So when we talk about cross-team communication and collaboration, we're talking about fostering, breaking down silos, fostering communication between development, between operations, between your teams who stand up infrastructure, between the teams who deploy applications. Basically, they all in some way have the same goal, and really there does need to be collaboration and shared ways of working between these groups. Automation, this is the key tenet of DevOps. We spend a lot of our life here at WM Promus really banging on about repetitive tasks oftentimes can be automated. There's lots of tools out there. You don't have to pay. There's lots of free tools out there, but there's lots of tools out there that will free up developers' time, free up operations staff time to focus on innovation, to focus on improving, to focus on more strategic work. And of course, the really good thing about automating stuff is you're then saying, right, actually, I've probably got higher quality outcomes. I've probably got less errors and stuff going on. The shift left concept. So what that really is about is moving security testing, quality assurance, and those type of processes earlier on in the life cycle of what you're doing, if it's software development, if it's infrastructure deployment, and so on. And I mean, one of the obvious reasons this is critical is defects are easier and cheaper to fix the earlier you catch them. So shift left is a core tenet of DevOps. Core tenet of DevOps is continuous monitoring and feedback. Constantly looking how to identify, troubleshoot issues quickly, and improve. Now, I've mentioned Agile here as one. They're closely related concepts, so they often tend to be mentioned in the same breath, but they do come from things at a slightly different angle. Agile focuses on the development process itself. It's about, it's emphasizing iterative development, flexibility, lots of the end group that you're delivering to, lots of collaboration with them and so on. But it really is about faster delivery and increased adaptability to change. And, DevOps does incorporate those sort of core principles of Agile, such as continuous improvement and collaboration and so on. So I have listed that here. Now, this slide is a busy slide. So many of you will be familiar with the sort of DevOps cycle that I've got here. And when people talk about DevOps, they often group it into sort of categories of activities that might be happening. So when the DASA crowd said, well, do you want to talk about DevOps in general? I've included this slide, but I'm not going to spend ages drilling into each category, other than just to say, so source code management, it's a fundamental building block about that supports control and collaboration. It's about tracking changes you make to code. It's allowing developers work together in a much more effective way, much more efficiently, and so on. And the kind of tools you'll see out there, and again, we're vendor agnostic here at WM Promus. I'm not promoting any tool, but what I am saying, I'm going to mention some of the tools you will hear floating around in this area. So Git, GitHub, and that sort of thing. Artifact repos. So again, these are the building blocks used in the development process. They're a central storage location for those. You will have types of artifacts such as compiled code libraries, container images. So, pre-configured application environments packaged, ready for deployment. You will have, what else? Configuration files and so on. The kind of tools we talk about there, JFrog, you probably have come across that. If I'm talking about infrastructure as code, we're talking about having code that defines the resources you need, servers, storage, networks, and the configuration of those. And in that space, you'll hear people talking about Terraform, about Ansible, and so on. CI/CD pipelines. So you're talking about automating through the workflow of getting your code ready for production. So you're talking about the integration, the deployment, the development, and so on. And you'll hear tools such as Jenkins, GitLab, and so on mentioned in that area. In terms of containers, so everybody's really looking towards containers now because it's a very efficient. I mean, in many ways, containers have come from the world of virtualization, but what containers do is they hold everything: your application code, your libraries, your runtime, configuration files. Everything gets held together, and therefore you haven't got the same drain on the underlying hardware you have with VMs. So probably the best known container around we'd have is Docker, whereas you'll hear other software such as Microsoft offers specific Windows container options. Container orchestrators, those tools that let you manage containers. Kubernetes, you see commercial Kubernetes distributions such as Red Hat OpenShift, Amazon EKS, and so on. You'll hear those tools mentioned in that space. In terms of monitoring, what are we looking at? Tools like Dynatrace, Prometheus, Datadog, Splunk, you'll hear those tools mentioned. If we're talking about configuration management, probably the really well-known tools are Puppet, Slack. I've got a whole list of these types of tools: Puppet, Slack, Ansible, Chef. Now, there is a lot of crossover. And I have said DevOps is a mindset. It's a way of working. It's not a tool set, but it's very hard to do anything in an IT team without the right tools. And so in general, if you're taking on board DevOps principles, DevOps practitioners will rely on the solutions that have been built up from this way of working. And typically they'll rely on an infrastructure as code tool. They'll rely on a CI/CD pipeline. They may have introduced containerization into their world, and therefore they may also have cloud projects or have moved a lot of their IT estate to the cloud. So you'll be looking at tools that support that. Now, if we think of, say, Ansible, Chef, Puppet, SaltStack as configuration management tools, they're designed to install, to manage software on existing servers, whereas something like Terraform is seen as an orchestration tool designed to provision the actual servers themselves, leaving the other tools I've just mentioned, the configuration management ones like Ansible, to get on with the job of configuring those servers afterwards. But it is worth bearing in mind, those categories aren't mutually exclusive, because most configuration management tools can do a degree of provisioning, and most orchestration tools can do some degree of configuration management. So there are many ways to achieve the same result. It is about the workflow that you choose. And, even though one tool could possibly do both things, it doesn't necessarily mean you should. We've had clients who started out with Puppet. They've then done some implementation in Ansible. They may use both tools, or maybe they have a preference for one over the other. So what I would say is there's no single DevOps tool that can get you there. but do play with, there's usually a free version of a lot of these tools out there that's available for download and playing with. And I would say it's about playing with these tools and getting familiar with what they allow you to do. And they will tackle those challenges that I have showed on a previous slide. Because really at its core, DevOps is saying we need to change the organization's culture where we're seeing consistent outcomes being hindered. We need to encourage automation. So encourage the routine tasks to be automated and free up people to do better stuff. And we also need to encourage the enablement of measurement. So you can say, what I have done is worthwhile, and there should be better ways to do it. Because if you're not looking for ways to better automate, to measure, to share, your competitors, I can guarantee you are, regardless of what industry you're in. So, don't be afraid to dive in and try some of these tools, many of which are free. Right, I'm going to talk about three or four projects that we worked on, because one of the things DASA suggested was, can you just tell people how it went for you with your clients? So this project we did was with the University of Sussex. They're a public research university located in East Sussex, down the south of England. One of the things they're intent on doing is continually securing themselves from the risk of cyber attacks. Now, a large portion of their estate late last year was CentOS, and given that CentOS is reaching the end of life, there was a need to migrate to an alternative. So we chatted them about options and about the challenges they faced and about why they already had quite a large amount of end-of-life software in their estate and so on. So what we realized is, like many people, they're highly skilled, they've got their own team, but they were drowning under sort of business as usual work. They were planning to do cyber auditing and accreditation. They were highly risk averse. They were under-resourced. They did have some configuration management tooling, but it wasn't particularly well used, and they would have benefited from a health check with that. So that's what we did. We divided the project into 3 phases, and we were convinced we could introduce DevOps whilst we were doing the migration to Red Hat. Red Hat is what they chose as the tool they would move to, for obvious reasons, such as CentOS and Red Hat got the same underlying kernel, so that was all fine. So in the first phase, what we did was we did an assessment of their IT estate. Okay, what they have, which were the high priority servers to move, and so on. And we did a pilot. We took a subset of those and said, right, by doing the pilot, we will understand what your current working processes are, the fact that you don't do a lot of automation, the fact that you have a cab that runs weekly, you have a very firm change management process in place, and so on. We then, in phase 2, which we ran in parallel with phase 1, stage 1, we did an analysis of the configuration management practices and the tooling that they had in place. So when our migration pilot was in place, we ran phase 3, and phase 3 was a DevOps jumpstart. And what we did was say, right, we're going to get everybody using version control, which I've already mentioned. So that was about everybody embracing the first concept of collaboration, consistency, and so on. We did a workshop called Zero to Hero. We did some labs. Everybody was really keen, totally understood it, took it on board. And then we said, right, we're now going to introduce you to Ansible. We're going to stand up Ansible for you. We're going to run some co-coding workshops, and we're going to show you how wonderful it is to have servers configured using code you've pre-built. We co-coded some playbooks for them, and then we also looked at the tools that had them drowning, the tasks that had them drowning, and said, right, let's pick off some of these and see what ones of these you can automate using Ansible. So it meant that as phase 1 was plowing through, people were taking on new DevOps skills. And phase 1, we then had them become involved in phase 1. We used a tool called Red Hat have a CentOS to RHEL migration tool. We built Ansible playbooks that would deploy that and said to them, right, you guys now know what we're doing. So be part of our team and let's plow through the IT estate much more quickly. So this is an example of a project where you don't start off necessarily saying, oh, this is a DevOps project, but you start off with saying, what are your challenges? What are you facing? We see a space for DevOps in this. Right, let's look at another. And I do see some questions in, and I promise once I fly through these slides to answer them. Right, here's another project we've had. So this client is they're a law firm. They're part of that elite group known as the Magic Circle, which refers to the top law firms in the United Kingdom. They're global. they have this in-house suite of applications. Some of them are in-house apps they've developed, and they also use some third-party apps, which are all around, and the business really heavily relies on these applications across their, their location in Hong Kong, Singapore, London, Manchester, and so on, so on. These applications allow them to centralize their client management. So it's about onboarding a new client. It's about tracking the time their lawyers spend on particular cases and so on. The issue was that they weren't self-sufficient in deploying, upgrading, patching, and so on, the environments these applications were running on, and also the applications themselves. So they were heavily reliant on third parties to help them with this. And that was a very costly exercise. And it also introduced a certain amount of time delay. They also couldn't do it across all of their geographic locations at the one time, which meant they ended up with weekend after weekend after weekend of upgrades going on. So what we introduced them to was a Puppet was what we introduced them to. And we also had them introduce them to Chocolatey as a package management tool, Bitbucket. We ran a zero to hero workshop around Bitbucket for them. And we did lots of in-house work upskilling sessions with their team to say, right, this is how we suggest you should do it. We also built out, they're very risk averse as well. They wanted to build out sandbox environments where anytime there was a new patch or anything, their highly integrated apps could be tested in the sandbox environment. They would feel there was a massive level of confidence, and then they could repeat this in production environments. So the project did expand, where we were eventually in a position where the application deployments and upgrades could occur across multiple regions with minimal downtime and with rollouts happening far, far quicker. Whereas upgrades had meant weekend after weekend of the same crew implementing whatever the CAB had reviewed for one region, then moving on to the next region and so on. It did mean that you could now have things happening in parallel. Now, the outcome was we did measure this. This was very important that we measured this so we could prove to the business the value was deployment times were 30 times faster, and they reckon they reduced deployment costs by 1,500%. But what they were absolutely sure was they were actually able to remove the outsourced provider around the applications that were from third-party vendors, which was critical for them. Right, here's another project. So this one was introduced, we hadn't got the client directly. It was introduced to us via a software vendor, Aqua, the software vendor. They specialize in security. They're a DevSecOps company. The client themselves specialize in GPS technology. They do it for a variety of stuff, from watches to automotives to marine technology and so on. Now, in some way, their challenges are the same to everyone. The more spread out you are, the more cloud, the more on-prem, the more devices, the more apps, the more everything, the more pressure there is to provide continual enforcement of security and of regulatory policies. So this client, they really needed to face down the current risks. And also, as they were scaling over time, they needed to be able to face that down as well. And they didn't just want to tackle exposure to security attacks for their cloud native applications. They really no longer wanted manual processes for policy enforcement. And they were well aware of their own, and indeed they're not alone here, their own security capability and capacity shortage. And again, another challenge I mentioned earlier was we're back to this previous issue of reporting. They were heavily in need of assistance with compliance reporting. So what we did was we implemented automated image scanning to identify vulnerabilities. So analyzing container images for known vulnerabilities. We set up runtime security. That's automated policy restrictions and reporting for detecting unauthorized access and so on. The tool we used, Aqua Security, we integrated this with a CI/CD pipeline. So that meant the images were scanned in the CI/CD pipeline. Now, we had created image assurance policies to be scanned against. For example, a policy to prevent running an image as a root. We also had a package blacklist policy, so you couldn't download any packages that were blacklisted, and so on. Now, another key to all of this was working closely with the security, the applications, and the infrastructure teams to embed that principle of shift-left security, which is at the heart of DevOps. So this is really about baking in security from the beginning. Now, I do have one more, and I'm conscious of the time, so I'll quickly quickly go through this because I do want to get through some, what do I think are our recommendations after not just these projects, but the many that we've done. So this project was for a bank, they're a global bank, and they said, right, we have a self-service portal where our wider staff can request things. They can ask for things like a new laptop bag. They can ask for a new laptop and so on. We would like to have some sort of a portal which would allow requests such as, patching of operations, requesting a new web server and so on. That makes sense. That certainly seems like a great approach. Off the back of this type of arrangement, you're obviously going to have a workflow so that you can have some consistency and standardization about how those requests are fulfilled. Excuse me. You also need to have some ability to see where in the workflow that request is being, what stage it is towards it being fulfilled. And it's not really enough just to have the portal to raise the request. What you'd really like is that when someone raises a request, such as requesting a new web server, that would be filled automatically. Excuse me, I'm just having a quick coffee. Right, okay, so we did do this. So what we did was, we said, right, where you start with this is actually you start with the bottom item, the automation of configuration management tasks. So we used both Puppet and Ansible to do some building some modules and playbooks to automate a lot of the tasks they wanted to do. We said start off small. They did originally use MuleSoft for a workflow. I think that was replaced by Kong after that. And all of this was done prior to building the front end portal. And I'll talk about why I believe that is the approach that people should adopt. Right, with 5 minutes to go, what are our tips? Okay, start simple. The expression "do not try to slay your dragon out of the gate" is really, it really is the flag I'm flying here. If you try to take on a massive, complex or challenging problem first, or try to adopt a big bang approach with DevOps, honestly, you will just have huge levels of frustration. It'll take you ages to deliver something of any value. I think you will lose sight of where it is you're trying to go. I really do think that what people should do is tackle the low-hanging fruit first. In terms of principles, I think what you need to do is to embed principles first of all. So things like version control, infrastructures, version control, so you've got collaboration, automation, so look to infrastructure as code. Get those principles in place first, start small. My next tip, left to right isn't always right. So here is, I spoke earlier about that portal we built for people where you could make a request, it would go through a workflow, it would be fulfilled and so on. When you draw out these things for the project sponsor or the business, they will often see things in terms of left to right. But actually, if you're automating a workflow, left to right isn't actually always the place to start. What you often need is the fulfillment part, the orchestration part is the part where you should actually automate first. So again, what I would do is, as with the other project for the bank, I would say do your automating first and then start building backwards as to how to manage your workflow and your portal and so on. So the old way was manual paperwork and machines. The new way, in the DevOps way, is automation. Back to this, tackle the low-hanging fruit. So things like creating infrastructure as code to do things like, defining things like what type of operating system you want on the server. Things like defining network settings, IP addresses, subnet masks. Things like, what else? Provisioning storage resources, automating the installation and the configuration of software on your server. All of that type of stuff. That low-hanging fruit is the stuff that will show value. You will bring people along with you because you will involve your infrastructure, your apps people, your security people.